In this video, I'm going to give you an overview on how Tabular Editor 3 can help you save time, improve the quality of your models, and become a better data modeler yourself. Let's take a look. The purpose of Tabular Editor 3 is to help you be more productive and improve the quality of your models. You can do this using Tabular Editor alone to build or manage your models, or together with other tools like Power BI Desktop or Visual Studio. Consider, for example, this model that I have open in Power BI Desktop on my local machine. Right now, Power BI Desktop is currently processing some changes I made, and it's taking quite a long time because it's a pretty big model. Even when you save this model, you're going to be seeing this working on it bubble for quite some time, and that's normal because Power BI Desktop is dealing with the model and the data. So it's going to take a long time when it has to process these changes, especially for bigger models or models that get complex. In Tabular Editor, you don't have to worry about these processing times. It's lightweight because you're only working with the metadata and you're working in disconnected mode. You connect to the model, you load the metadata, and you do your work. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's continue our work in Tabular Editor. We're going to connect to the local model that we have open in Power BI Desktop, which we can see here. And we can see that the model is displayed here on the right-hand side. We have all of our tables in this Tom Explorer window. When we expand them, the columns and the measures. In some of our measures, we have warning icons and X icons indicating that there are errors and there are warnings. When we go to the messages window, Tabular Editor is giving us some caution, telling us that there are some problems. And this is something that Tabular Editor does very well. It points out any issues in our model so that we can deal with them before they really become a problem. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's double click the first message, and immediately we can see that there's an issue with this measure. There's also a lot of other things happening here. For instance, I don't like that this variable is not having a realistic name. Let's go ahead and press Ctrl R and rename it to target all at once. And this one we can rename to percentage, since that's the actual result, these variables. And something we could do is we could check why this measure is a problem. We could peek its definition, and we can indeed see that there's something going on here. So you can peek any definition of any reference, not only for measures, but also for variables, which is really handy when you're working with code. But now we need to actually change that definition, so let's do that. You can always go back by pressing these arrows. But we can see here that can't find that table, so we need to add the appropriate table qualifier. And Tabular Editor is automatically giving us some smart suggestions about what belongs in that spot. It's also telling us what this function actually does, the syntax, as well as where our cursor is in that syntax, and other useful information. We're going to go ahead and fix this error. And if we wanted any more information, we could hover on the function, and it tells us what the result will be. In this case, a table of one column. But if we want to understand how this function works, we could right-click and go to its documentation. Any DAX function, we can do this, go to its documentation, and it even has a shortcut. So we fixed the error, but the DAX still looks like crap. So what can we do to fix it? We can format it. Formatting DAX is very important to make sure that it's readable and understandable. Now, we could do this manually, but that is a huge waste of time, and one of the main reasons why people don't format DAX in the first place, because it's a waste of time. However, with Tabular Editor, you can just push a button and it does it for you. Now, I suspect that the other measures are also not formatted, and indeed it seems that way, but I'm not going to check every single measure because that's also a huge waste of time. Instead, I'm going to right-click the model, script DAX, and it's going to get all the DAX from my entire model and put it in one place so I can check it. Now again, I could do this manually, for example, if I was looking for something like a specific reference, but I could also press Ctrl F and have Tabular Editor find it for me. For example, if I were trying to find any measures that referenced the date column, so I could fix that in all the places. But it seems like there was only one measure that had that problem, so we're good. Now, let's indeed format our measures and our calculated columns. When we press Format DAX, with one button, we formatted all the DAX in our model. So what we're going to do is we're going to apply and sync these changes, and we're going to, just for good measure, save these changes back to our model open in Power BI Desktop. Now, when we open Power BI Desktop, we can see a calculated column needs to be refreshed. That's the calculated column that we just formatted the DAX of. And indeed, when we open up these measures, we can see that all of the issues have been fixed, and the DAX is also formatted. So any change we make in Tabular Editor, we write it to Power BI Desktop, and it's instantly visible. Now, what about changes we make in Power BI Desktop? What if we did something in Power Query, or we even changed some DAX? So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go same period last year instead of this date add function. All right, so we made a change to this DAX measure. And when we go back to Tabular Editor, we can see that that same change is now visible as well. So these two tools are talking to each other fluently. They're interchangeable. We can use them to have the benefits of all the productivity enhancements in Tabular Editor, while also being able to use Power Query and explore our data in Power BI Desktop. Note that in Tabular Editor, we can also see the Power Query code, but we can't change it in Tabular Editor because it's not yet supported by Power BI Desktop. Before we leave our Power BI Desktop scenario, there's one last thing that I want to demonstrate. Take, for instance, that we wanted to rename our measures. This is something that we could do one by one, but again, that would be a big waste of time. In Tabular Editor, what we can do is we can batch any changes we want. So any properties that we want to change, let's say we want to change their format string to a specific value, we want to put them in a specific display folder, we can just group all those measures, even across tables, and then we can change those properties. So renaming is the same thing. We can go batch rename, change sales amount to revenue, press OK, and it renames all those objects. So Tabular Editor is full of these kind of features that are intended to save you time so that you can stop focusing on these stupid redundant tasks and instead focus on the value that really matters, so that you don't have to waste time on renaming things or changing the code or even checking things for DAX. What if you wanted to optimize your model? Let's say we're dealing with a really big model here, right? So you saw how slow it was when I was making changes in Power BI Desktop. When you deal with models of this size, typically one thing you want to do is to optimize them. You want to make sure that your reports are fast, that the model's not too big. So to do this, we want to check what is contributing to the size of this model. We could go to the Vertipaq Analyzer tab in Tabular Editor, and we could collect statistics about our model. We see that we have here a model that's fairly large, 6.13 gigabytes, and we can check which columns are contributing the most to this size. And there's one column in particular that's contributing to 64% of the model size, DB size, and that is the order number in the sales table. We could check the sales table to see what that column is. We could preview it, for example, and we could look for the order number, and which should be here somewhere on the left. And indeed, this is just the number for the order, as the name suggests. But we could also just query that with a DAX query, for example. So if we wanted to check just that column, because it's kind of silly to check the entire table, order number, and then run the DAX query, and then it will give us the values from all the values. And we can see that because this is such a big table, even the DAX query is taking a long time. We could delete this column and we could remove 2/3 of the model size. So we can not only use Tabular Editor to build our model, but also to optimize our model. And this is particularly helpful when we're dealing with these large models, or we're dealing with models that have already been made by someone else, or we're just checking up on models that we made previously. Now, as you've seen, we can connect to Power BI Desktop and we can benefit from these productivity enhancement features. We can benefit from all the DAX help that we can get from Tabular Editor. We can already start to optimize our model. But what about when we've published the model into workspace in Microsoft Fabric or the Power BI service? Well, if you have Power BI Premium per user, Fabric capacity, or Premium capacity, then you can also connect to these remote models. So let's do that. We're going to close this model, and we're going to open the same model now in the workspace. And it's It's very easy to just select a different workspace, Contoso Dev. And I'm going to connect to that same model we were just connected to. We can run the Vertipaq analyzer again, see that it's the same size, or at least I expect it to be, 6.13 gigabytes, and indeed we have this order number being the largest column. Now, we can do all the same things that we were just doing in Power BI Desktop, but now we can also make changes, for example, to the Power Query. We could even format the Power Query, for example. I have a macro that does that for me. So you can write these custom macros that do anything in Tabular Editor that you want. So this macro calls an API in order to format the Power Query for me so it's more readable, and also so I can add steps to document it. So you can work with not only DAX in Tabular Editor, but also Power Query or M-code. And this becomes particularly helpful if you have a lot of different Power Query steps, or if you have, for example, an incremental refresh model. So there's a table that needs to be incrementally refreshed. Now, let's look at this model in a little bit more detail. We have the sales table, and let's add all the related tables. This is a mess, so we're going to auto-arrange this into a nice diagram. These kind of diagrams are helpful not only to understand the model, but also to save as documentation. It's also functional because we could delete the relationship or edit the relationship straight from this window like you would in Power BI Desktop. Now, we talked about optimizing the model, for example, reducing the size, but another way that we could optimize our model is by using the best practice analyzer. We could load some best practice rules. So here I've already loaded some from GitHub, for example, and then it will check our model for any best practice violations. It seems like right now we don't have any, but there are some that we've ignored. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually connect to a different model that's a little bit more complicated, and we're going to explore it in a little bit more detail. Let's go ahead and connect to another model in another database. We're going to connect to a model called SpaceParts in the development database, OTC full, and we're not going to make any changes or save our diagram. So this model, as you can see, it does have some best practice violations. First, let's try to look at this model in a bit more detail to understand what it is. We have some fact tables here. So budget, for example, we can add all the related tables. So auto arrange. So we can add another diagram for the another fact table for the forecast, for example, add all related tables, auto arrange. So it seems like we have a pretty standard, sales model with some orders data as well. So add all related tables, auto arrange, with maybe some junk dimensions here and there as well. So, okay. So, and it seems like we have the main violation we have here is that we are summarizing our numeric columns. So this is something that often results in these implicit measures. So we don't want these to summarize because they're not things that should be summarized by end users, like the workdays month to date or the calendar month. So we could go through and fix these columns one by one in the model, setting their properties to do not summarize. But we could also just let Tabular Editor do this for us because we've provided an instruction on how it should be fixed. So now if we press that button, then Tabular Editor will fix all of those issues. We have no more best practice violations. It just sets all of those columns to do not summarize, and it's done. Now, we might make some changes, like, for example, deleting a column or something like this that requires us to refresh a table. For instance, we might need to refresh the invoices table after fixing some of these best practice violations. After we do that, we first have to save the changes that we make to the model. So we're saving to our remote model in Power BI. We can write changes to the workspace, and then we can right click and select refresh and do a full refresh of our invoices table. So we can trigger refreshes of individual tables, even individual partitions using Tabular Editor 3. And what's better, we can follow up on those refreshes in real time to see how long it's taking, but more importantly, how many rows have been loaded to the model. This is really helpful when we're trying to troubleshoot refresh issues like refresh is taking too long and we want to figure out which table, or if we're having errors in one of the tables, so we refresh several at once. Using Tabular Editor, we have a full point of view on what's happening with the refresh as it's happening if we trigger it from within Tabular Editor. And notice, because we're working in disconnected mode, even though that table is refreshing, we can still work with it. We can still, for example, unhide columns or even delete columns. Even though this is going to break a whole bunch of stuff, we can still do it. And we can keep working even though the refresh is happening. It's not going to interrupt our work because we're working in disconnected mode. But we have even more benefits from that disconnected mode. And you'll see that I just pressed Ctrl Z, I'm undoing those changes. So any changes you make in Tabular Editor, you can just undo. So you don't have to worry, even if I accidentally delete the entire table, I can just press Ctrl Z. And it's not going to affect anything until we actually write those changes to our remote database. So to summarize, we've seen a number of different features that we can use in Tabular Editor to help us build and manage our models. More importantly, focusing on productivity, so we save time, but also to optimize our models and improve the quality of our models. We've just touched the surface on a lot of these features, but it's still really nice to see that some of these things can help us spend less time on these kind of basic and monotonous tasks, or to help us pay attention to issues, or just be, more convenient so that development is less of a painful process. Now let's try to actually make a model from scratch in Tabular Editor and deploy it to a Fabric workspace. So we're going to close this model, and we're going to not save any of these diagrams, and we're going to make a new model. We're going to make a model for Microsoft Fabric, a Power BI model for Microsoft Fabric. It's not going to be a Direct Lake model, but we could make it for Direct Lake. And we're going to use a workspace database, which means that we're going to save this directly to a workspace in Microsoft Fabric. At the same time, we're also going to save some local metadata so we can check that metadata into source control. And for this demo, I'm going to use the SpaceParts database from Tabular Editor. This is a free database that anyone can use. It's an Azure SQL database that has a lot of business rules and complexity, even data quality issues, to help you learn tools like Tabular Editor, Power BI, and any tool in Microsoft Fabric. And again, it's completely free. In order to use this, you just have to go to the Tabular Editor Learn website and follow the first module. And then you can find out how to connect to it yourself. So we're going to create a new model, and we're going to overwrite the existing SpaceParts database. It's going to dump everything in that database that's there now, and it's just going to update it with the metadata for an empty model. Normally, we would have to go into Power BI and add the credentials, but I've already done that. So what we can now do is we can start adding tables. So I'm going to go into the model, import tables, and Tabular Editor has this import tables wizard that makes it really easy to add supported data sources. So we're going to use Power Query because we have an import model, and we're adding tables from an Azure SQL database. We're just going to call this the SpaceParts database. So we're going to add the server name, and this is with SQL Server authentication, and then we'll add the password. The database that we're connected to here is the SpaceParts database. So we'll remember our password, and we'll proceed by choosing what we want to add. In this demo, we're just going to add some very simple tables. We're going to add our customers data, our products data, and then some information about orders, for example. Now, we could choose which columns we want to add. We see in Tabular Editor here that we get a preview of all the columns, which is super helpful. So we don't want the DW created date, and when we go to the products, so maybe we don't want to have, for example, the business line leader, which contains some personal information. So I think in the customers, there's also some personal information as well, the key account manager, and that's it. So Tabular Editor then confirms which tables and columns we're going to load, and it's going to create some M partitions because it's going to do this in Power Query. We press Finish, and Tabular Editor automatically adds the tables, the columns, and the Power Query code for the partition. So again, we don't have to wait for anything. It doesn't have to load the data. We don't have to wait for it to be loaded before we start developing our model. We can now just save the model. We're going to save the metadata. We're just going to save it into the default folder, and we can check it into source control if we want to. But now we can just proceed with refreshing the tables. So it's going to start refreshing those tables, and we can just continue working. So even though the data hasn't yet been loaded, it's loading it in progress, we can just keep working. So we don't have to wait. There's no waiting anymore. So we'll add the orders table, products, and customers, and we can start to create the relationships. Just dragging and dropping like you would, for example, in Power BI Desktop, with the orders to the products and to the customers, for example. We'll just auto-arrange this again, and if we wanted to, we could save this as documentation, but it's just a very simple 3-table model now, so that's it. So now, normally, you would want to, for example, add a date table. The date table is a very standard part of every model, and it's not something that you should be doing from scratch every time. So we could create the date table from a template, which is something that Tabular Editor allows. But what we can also do in Tabular Editor is copy between models. So what we can do is we can actually go into our model that has already been created. So there's a model here that already has a lot of complexity. It has all these different tables that are organized into folders, something you can do in Tabular Editor. And there's a date table here that I want to use. So I can just press Control-C, and I can go back to my model and just paste that model in. And any references are going to be broken, but I can just check the messages to see what the problem is here. So it says it can't find the table invoices, of course, because I don't have one. So I'm just going to change this to orders, for example. So I'll just change this to the orders billing date and format, and then done. We have our date table. It's nicely organized. It has the measures we need. It has the hierarchies we need, all the columns, and so on. So this is one way that we can get these kind of tables. But what about the measure table, for example? So what if we wanted to have a measure table? Well, another way to do this is, like I said, you could use these templates. And one way to use templates is by using macros. So if we go back here to our model, I can go macros, and I have all these macros that help me do things. For example, I could have created a date table with a macro. This is a macro that you can create. You can create your own macros, or you can find all kinds of macros available from the community. And in this case, I just select the earliest date, which I know is the order date, the latest date, which is the request goods receipt date, and it generates the date table for me with all of the organization. So any task you want to automate or streamline, you could do using these macros. For instance, if I wanted to create the measure and last refresh tables, now I have a table to store all my measures, and I also have a table and a measure that can tell the user when the model was last refreshed. So as you can imagine, all these tasks that you typically do in a model, you can streamline using macros. And at the end of the day, you know, when you want to relax and finish, you can use a macro which will go ahead and run Doom. Because why not? You can run Doom from Tabular Editor. So here's Doom, and you run it with a C# script. And I don't know, when you're waiting for your model to load or something, why not? Now, of course, that's not why you're here, so we're going to close Doom and I'll play it after the video. But to summarize, what you've seen is a number of the features that you have in Tabular Editor that can help you work with data models when you're connected to a local model in Power BI Desktop, a remote model that's in Microsoft Fabric or the Power BI service, or even when you're creating a new model from scratch. There's all kinds of things you can do that will help you save time, that will help you improve the quality of your model, and all of these things, particularly the community resources like the best practice rules or the macros, they can help you learn to become a better data modeler as well. So Tabular Editor can do all this and more. This is just looking at some of these surface features, just an overview. In future videos, we'll go into more details on other features that I haven't had the time to talk about here, like a debugger for helping you debug your complex DAX code, or even the DAX optimizer that can point out the bottlenecks in your code if you have a DAX optimizer account, which is a separate tool. We'll go into more details on that later. Hopefully this was helpful for you and you can understand how Tabular Editor can help you save time and improve your data models. Thank you very much, and as always, have fun making data models, automate the boring stuff.